For today's episode of Crappy Arguments, we're looking towards Twitter, where nothing good comes from. People say the dumbest things about really anything you can think of on Twitter. The Rian Johnson Twitter mob is a term that, of course, derives from three terrible things: Rian Johnson, Twitter, and the mob. The tweet I want to single out is as follows. There's speculation that Disney might sell Star Wars, and someone said whether or not they should sell Star Wars. In my opinion, they should give it back to George for free. But that's obviously not gonna happen. There was a response tweet by someone called Matt who said, and I quote, "No, it is a stupid idea to even bring up. Star Wars today, right now, is bigger and more popular and successful than it has ever been in its lifetime, especially after the damage the prequels did to the brand in the early 2000s. Ah yes, the classic blaming it all on George Lucas and the Star Wars prequels, that it ruined Star Wars and Star Wars was on the decline after 2005. That is such an ignorant remark that leaves out a lot of history and Star Wars media. Whenever I see a filthy casuals retrospective on Star Wars in which they shit on the prequels, the way they talk always indicates that they have no idea what was going on in between 1983 and 1999. In those 16 years, Star Wars was not just a dormant IP left to rot and be irrelevant. Other authors, mostly in regards to novels and comics, would contribute their own ideas to the brand. Notice in Matt's tweet he refers to Star Wars as a brand. Since Star Wars is a franchise based on films, there's obviously a lot more than just the movies. There was the Thrawn trilogy, there was Tales of the Jedi, there was Dark Empire, and there was Shadows of the Empire, the first big multimedia project Star Wars had. There was a lot of content designed to keep the IP relevant before George Lucas got back into the game. The prequels may not have even been possible without the media to keep Star Wars afloat. Now let's talk about during the prequel trilogy. The filthy casuals think that Star Wars was on the decline the day The Phantom Menace came out, and that simply isn't true. Since The Phantom Menace's release, the game publisher LucasArts, or Dark Horse Comics, and many other publishers in different fields, because of The Phantom Menace, had a shitload more material to work with. Even before The Phantom Menace came out, we got video games like Dark Forces, and the comic that would later be named Star Wars Republic, showcasing Mundi and whatnot. I imagine Matt, if he is watching this video, is completely lost at this point. But to further set the record straight, let's talk about the prequel release schedule. It's ludicrous to say that Star Wars was on the decline the day The Phantom Menace came out. In fact, we got a massive explosion of Star Wars content, the most notable thing being the video games. We started getting games like Episode 1 Racer, and when 2002 rolled around, we entered the era of what we call the golden age of Star Wars games. We got so many unique, experimental, and fun games in different genres of games. We got Star Wars Bounty Hunter, Knights of the Old Republic, which is considered one of the very best, Republic Commando, Jedi Outcast, Jedi Academy, Battlefront, Battlefront 2, the Revenge of the Sith game, etc. If you can't tell, not all of them were about the prequel trilogy. Knights of the Old Republic, in fact, was completely detached from the films. But since people who made today's crappy argument have no idea what a Revan is, of course they wouldn't know this. You see, this is why I'm so annoyed at these kinds of fans. They didn't do their research. They don't look at things from the bigger picture. Like insisting that the prequels did so much damage to Star Wars is untrue. Pretty much all of the external material carried on just fine. Post-prequel stories adapted to retcons in the expanded universe effectively, at least until Dave Filoni happened. And Star Wars progressed how you'd expect. Star Wars wasn't over after 2005, as much as prequel haters like to pretend it was. It's more accurate to say that Star Wars was thriving under George Lucas and the prequels releasing. But since it's hard to convince a single prequel-hating filthy casual to read the Thrawn trilogy at the very least, if they've even heard of it, they look at things from a film-only perspective. At best, they'll be a movies and TV shows only fan. And when I say TV shows, I mean everything from Dave Filoni onwards. That means they won't bother to watch the Droids cartoon, or the Ewoks cartoon, or even the Clone Wars micro-series most of the time. Nah, fuck those shows. I'm only watching what's modern, mainstream, and under Disney canon. I think that's a huge reason why takes on Star Wars by filthy casuals are so terrible when they don't do their research. It's because the Disney shit outnumbers the George Lucas era stuff in terms of accessibility. The thing is though, Disney has done a poor job understanding George Lucas's work. So no, the prequels did not ruin the Star Wars brand, because the word brand encompasses a lot more than what Star Wars primarily is as a film series. But if you want to talk about anyone ruining Star Wars, look right at Disney for that. Disney have been extremely incompetent with Star Wars. They've misrepresented the series so many times, corporatized it, and other stuff that has resulted in a decline in quality. I'm going to make it clear now. The sequels are terrible, but they are a piece of the larger reason why Star Wars is on the decline. The sequels are a symbolic reason for why Disney have no fucking clue what they're doing. When it comes to the shows, they're pretty much letting Filoni do whatever he wants, which is a mistake, resulting in the Lucasfilm story team being mostly useless, which results in stories contradicting each other, which leads to a messy timeline, and so much more cause and effects. Do I have to remind people about how poorly the rollout of Star Wars video games were under EA, who didn't really care about Star Wars and kept cancelling promising games? In the George Lucas era, video games thrived, but under Disney, for the entire decade, after The Force Unleashed 2, we got so much crap. First we got a crappy mobile game, and then we got a bare bones reboot of the Battlefront series, then we got Battlefront 2, which became one of the most controversial games in video game history. EA wanted to turn Star Wars Battlefront 2 into Star Wars Ultimate Team, and the backlash resulted in there being regulation. We should have never gotten to that point in the first place. But both Disney and EA's greed got us there. And keep in mind, in the early years of Disney Star Wars, I gave a shit about the games the most when it came to Star Wars. Playing Knights of the Old Republic 2 and Old Battlefront and a bunch of other games, I was so underwhelmed by the rollout of games. Then, of course, we finally got Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, the first release from EA that you could actually call a video game. Overrated as shit, but a decent part, with a lot of potential to expand. But even then, we've got shit like the Knights of the Old Republic remake, which is in a shaky development cycle. Do you see what I mean? Star Wars is more popular than ever, my ass. That's what I'm talking about. Star Wars fans like me are upset because Disney keep making the same bloody mistakes. I explained in the last debunking that they keep getting people who don't know their Star Wars to make Star Wars stories. J.J. Abrams, Rian Johnson, Taika Waititi, or however the fuck you say his name, they were all brought on not for their wisdom on Star Wars lore or because they had a great vision. Nah, they were brought on because they were the easiest people to get. Looper was a decent movie, but it had zero resemblance to Star Wars, nor did any of Rian Johnson's other films prior. The Kenobi writers have admitted very bluntly that they saw continuity as unimportant, which is why all the videos trying to explain or defend plot holes in the Kenobi show are utterly clueless. Do you see what I mean? There is very little to turn to in Disney canon that is enjoyable. They make so many ridicule-worthy blunders, and it's not even worth defending. I get frustrated that a lot of people don't listen to me. I've experienced more Star Wars content than someone like the Goldman ever will, but people would rather listen to him because he shares their opinion on liking the sequels. That and the fact that people haven't even watched my entire library of videos, nor have they even come close. The people who hate me only watch my videos on the movies, modern shows, and nothing else. Like, guys, I have a playlist on a bunch of the novels and comics and shit. Why don't you watch those? Bottom line, Star Wars was not dead after the prequel trilogy. It was fine. What resulted in the decline was the unbridled backlash against George Lucas, who had enough and sold Star Wars to Disney so people would shut the fuck up and be happy. Anyone trying to claim that the prequels ruined the Star Wars franchise obviously are not very experienced with what the Star Wars franchise has in it, because it isn't just the theatrical movies and the modern shows, guys. Star Wars, in fact, was at its peak since the release of The Phantom Menace up until 2012, before the dark times, before Disney. I'm JJ Plagiarisms, and until next time, what are stories but mystery boxes?
We found you hiding, we found you lying, choking on the dirt and sand, your former glories and all your stories, dragged and washed with eager hands. But oh, your city lies in dirt.